Welcome back to the Backseat Startup Podcast, where we give unsolicited advice to strangers on the internet.
Today I'm joined by Keith Wilson of Klearcoat Labs. Keith, thank you so much for being on the show. Can you share a little bit more about your background and how you came to start Klearcoat Labs?
Yeah, thanks, Luke, and I appreciate you for having me and everything that you guys are doing for startup founders like myself. I've worked over a decade in the automotive industry, and just seeing all this new technology that's going into the industry, the rise of electric vehicles, how vehicles are getting more digital, and also this rise of new technologies within AI, Web3. It just makes so much sense to me to try to find a way to combine the two. I've always kind of been trained to think, ahead, right? 5 to 10 years out as far as what vehicles can do for people and for society. And just seeing all this new technology just made so much sense. And that was one of the main reasons I started Klearcoat. It's a way to kind of bridge the gap between the automotive industry and this new technology that's being implemented in so many people's lives right now. And so, we're really excited about the work that we're doing. We're essentially a Web3 company, and we're building out that infrastructure that allows automotive brands to deploy digital twins of their physical products. As you know, every industry is now becoming much more digital, and having digital assets that also represent the physical versions. And so we're just trying to get ahead of that in the automotive industry, because the automotive industry has some pretty cool physical assets.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that background. As you know, this is the show where we give unsolicited advice to strangers on the internet. So we will head over to Reddit and find a question posed by a founder, and you and I will give our thoughts.
Sweet, let's do it.
Let's jump in. So I will read this for the sake of the listeners. Profit sharing instead of equity changed my mind. I'm working with my 5th startup right now after putting my own on hold for a minute. I'm trying to save some extra money before diving in again after having paid for a wedding and some legal things, and it's become really clear to me that I'd rather do profit sharing right off the bat with employees and co-founders rather than equity. Here's why. I'm really good at startups. I'm a 20-plus year software engineer and have taken multiple startups from pre-seed to Series B, valuations upward of $400 million, patents and acquisitions. I've done this every time as an employee with ISOs, and do you know how many times those ISUs have worked out? Never. Not once. It's a joke and it's a manipulative tactic to get your early employees to stick around. Even if they do exercise the options, you've waited 4 years for them to vest and now have to pay an absurd amount in taxes and phantom income. This alone is a reason people won't exercise and will be forced to wait for a sale. They will stay in a job that has changed dramatically and put up with a lot of BS for maybe a payout in an unknown number of years, harboring bad feelings and feeling trapped because if they leave, they lose their stock. If you exercise, you could owe hundreds of thousands to the IRS next tax year. This has been me. This is BS. I am going to do profit sharing instead. 1% in ISOs that vest over 4 years? Nope. Instead, you get that percentage of profit every quarter, growing to 1% after 4 years. I don't even care if this is a barrier for investors. This model needs to change. Interesting. Okay, this is a really cool post. I would love to hear just your general thoughts starting off at the top.
He is definitely passionate about it. So, it really just comes down to the founder, right, and what they're comfortable with. Some are comfortable with the model of profit sharing, some aren't. There are even VC companies that their model is to not take equity and they do a revenue share type of model, right? If you are, a company that has a lot of, fast moving goods or services. And so it really just comes down to their personal preference and finding people that are okay with that. And I think, some employees may actually be okay more with getting money on the front end as opposed to possibility of equity on the back end. So, I think if he's as good of an operator and founder as he's mentioning, and he has, this track record of actually being able to deliver, profit that makes sense, then hey, go for it. But, I think with that, you have to just make sure that what you're doing is sustainable, right? It's something that will keep people around for a longer time, because you may have competitors that want to snipe, some of your people with the promise of equity, and they may be further along than you are as a company, actually, further along to where they are closer to an exit. And so, I think you just have to try to make sure that what you're doing is sustainable. It does offer kind of growth, more growth opportunities as far as the profit that could be made. And, if it works for you, it works for you.
Yeah, really well said. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and partially because I'm kind of a zealot about the alternative minimum tax. So, if any listeners are not aware of it, when this poster mentions the phantom gains and being taxed by the IRS, so a lot of people think ISOs, incentive stock options, are tax free, and that's kind of a misnomer because there is something called the alternative minimum tax. And I won't go into too much of a spiel. Do yourself a favor if you're receiving ISOs. Really dig into that, make sure you understand, because you could be looking at a pretty large tax bill when you exercise, and that might be a ways from a liquidity event. And that's really, really complicated. I totally agree that there's a lot of flaws in the current equity compensation model for startups. I lean towards using RSUs, restricted stock units, rather than profit sharing. But I really like this take. This is somebody who has seen their employees be left on the sidelines for a really long time, and they're trying to do something about it, which I have the utmost of respect for. It's definitely not a one size fits all model. For instance, like some industries by design are not profitable for a really long time. So like my background is in biotech, and that would never work because basically biotech companies are pre-revenue until acquisition a lot of times. I mean, you're going through the FDA process and everything like that. And, this might make sense for a SaaS company, for instance, that is typically more high cash flow, but really, really interesting. Have you, I guess, if you're allowed to share, have you been in a company that did a profit sharing model like this?
Not a profit sharing model. I was in one that did RSUs, and so that was, to your point, a very interesting scenario. But it definitely worked out. But profit sharing is one that I've always kind of been interested in. I think I had a buddy or two that was actually employed with a company that did profit sharing. They seem to have liked it, right? I mean, they're getting money right then and there. But it was just kind of different from the norm, from what they expected. But I think for, a lot of employees, something is better than nothing, right? I mean, I work for companies where I don't get stock and I don't get profit sharing, right? And so I'm just basically working for a paycheck and a 401k. And so I think, you're seeing many more of these opportunities with, younger companies that are coming out with the opportunity to actually have a piece of the company, or actually, get money from what you actually do from a profit sharing standpoint. So I mean, I like it. I mean, I like that people that are working for some of these companies are able to now get more than just a paycheck and a 401k. That they actually have some ownership either in the company, or the direct work that they're putting in is paying off directly, to their pockets, right? And so, I mean, I love it. I think we're seeing a lot of that nowadays, and so I'm all for it.
I'm curious your take on the potential hires perspective. So a lot of people join startups with hopes that their equity is worth something someday at an exit or other sort of liquidity event. And I certainly hear this poster, this has never happened. I've been in a bunch of successful companies and ISOs never worked out. How do you think that translates into like the job market when there's kind of an expectation that early stage company employees will be receiving equity? I guess that's the question. What do you think? Do you think there's enough of a large enough segment of the workforce that would be interested in something like this in lieu of the traditional equity model?
I think there probably is. A lot of people like kind of direct cash as opposed to the promise of cash that may or may not ever come. Because, anything could happen, right? I mean, you never know what can happen to the company down the road. Leadership could, just falter, and, things can just kind of get, tanked down the road. And so, the idea of just upfront cash in regards to profit sharing in some regard, I think, as you see more of that, more people might be actually open to that. Because, I mean, even if you leave the company, right now you have zero control of what happens to that stock or whatnot. Yeah, you're vested in it just to an extent, right? But who knows what's going to happen to it? It may tank. It may go up. You never know, right? But at least while you were there, from a profit sharing standpoint, you were actually getting paid, right then and there for the actual contributions that you were able to make to the company. And so I think it just comes down to personal preference. I think you're going to have people that prefer either or. To your point, I think depending on the industry, you'll probably see a lot more people that may be looking for stock in certain industries because they see a bigger path to or better path to an exit. as opposed to some industries, to your point, like biotech or some of those maybe very open margin type of organizations or companies or industries. They may be open to actually having profit sharing, right? Especially if they're doing a job like a sales job or some kind of marketing job, to where their compensation cannot be tied to their actual output and contributions, right? And so I've seen a lot of that as well, to where there's a hybrid model to where I'm getting my base pay, I'm getting 401k, but I'm also getting RSUs, and I'm getting a little bit of a profit sharing as well, based on my direct contributions. And so, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. But I think what we're seeing less of is the idea of the pension, right? And so I think there has to be something that offsets that. And who knows, one of each or a hybrid of both could maybe work.
Yeah, really well said. I completely agree. I think there's a lot of people who would rather have $1 in their pocket than maybe getting $2 down the line. So I completely agree there. The poster says, I don't care if this is a barrier for investors. We'd like to drill down on that. Do you think this makes for it obviously makes for a kind of wonky cap table. Actually, I guess it makes for a very clean cap table, but a very unusual, I guess, in the startup world. So do you have any insights or opinions into what you think investors would think of this model?
Yeah, I think some may have a few questions in regards to, right, because they want to see profitability as early as possible in the company, to know that, their investment that they're making is a sound investment, the operator knows how to run the business, and they have a clear path towards more growth. But I think if this founder has this model, then they may just have all those boxes checked, right, to where they're confident enough that they can deliver on profitability to pay out, profit sharing to their employees, and with enough profits still to last to have the company be pretty solvable. So I think some investors may be turned off, right, because they'd rather see that profitability going right back into the company directly, invested into the company. But some may see it as, well, it is somewhat of an investment into the company because it's an investment into the people, and they're going to want to work harder, right? And so you just never know, right? Investors are different, right? And some, so some may like it and see the value in it. Because it's kind of empowering financially, their workforce. But some may say, hey, I'd rather see you put this directly into the business to help grow the business in some regard from an R&D standpoint. So I would be okay with it because I would be assuming that, if you have enough profitability to do this profit sharing, then you have enough left over to be put into the business as well, right? But I would just have to see the numbers. And if I'm seeing that you still are carrying a fairly good profit, after paying out, your employees, then I think I'd be okay with it, because I think it makes them stick around a little longer.
Yeah, I think so too. I guess if I were evaluating this company for investment, I would want to make sure they're actually moving towards an exit, because, as an investor, I want to make sure that I get my money out. And if I think this model makes a lot of sense for people who want to, or less focused on an exit, just because they're maximizing their life in the business and treating their employees well and paying them out and things like that. But I guess that would be a quick question that would come to my mind. But just wrapping this up, general thoughts on how you think about compensating your team.
Yeah, so me at this point, kind of as an early stage founder, I look at compensating my team in regards to equity right now. I think once we're able to really get things going, get revenue generating, the model that we have as far as our revenue model does keep open the opportunity for revenue sharing. Because a lot of our revenue is going to be tied to the volume that we put out as far as the digital twins. And so I think with that, we can certainly be pretty flexible in regards to being able to offer our employees equity and maybe a little bit of profit sharing based on the contributions or the partnerships that they make, or just the pure volume that we generate from a vehicle sales perspective.
Great. Sounds like a great place to work. Well, Poster, you are welcome for the unsolicited advice. Keith, I'm so glad you came on. How can listeners connect with you?
Yeah, listeners can connect with me on LinkedIn. So Keith Wilson, MBA on LinkedIn, or connect with me on Twitter at Goodfella_KO11 on Twitter. Or you can follow our automotive project Helix Age of the Auto Games on Twitter as well, and that's at Helix_auto.
Perfect. You heard him. Go check out those resources. Go to the Klearcoat Labs website, learn about what they're all about. But Keith, again, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure to meet you and pleasure featuring your company.
Luke, thanks, man, and I appreciate everything that you guys are doing for startup founders. Really appreciate the work, man.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you.
Right.
Take care.
Thanks. Have a good one.
The Backseat Startup Podcast is brought to you by Startup Founder Daily, a media company focused on early-stage companies. To learn more or apply to be featured for free, head over to startupfounderdaily.com.